It began with laughter, light, carefree, and utterly unaware of the silence waiting just beneath the earth. On the afternoon of October 23, 1997, in the hushed outskirts of Millbrook, Alabama, two children vanished near an abandoned well hidden behind overgrown kudzu vines and rusted farm tools. Their names were Eloan Finch and Thaddeus Tad Merrick, neither common, neither forgotten. Locals still whisper about the way the sky seemed to hold its breath that day, as if the world itself knew something irreversible had just occurred. Millbrook, though small, had always prided itself on safety. Porch swings creaked gently in the evening breeze. Neighbors left keys under doormats. Children roamed freely until the street lights flickered on. But that autumn afternoon shattered the illusion. Eloan, just 9 years old, with wild chestnut curls and a habit of collecting smooth river stones, had dared Tad, 10, wiry and fiercely protective of his younger cousin, to explore the old Finch property. Once prosperous, the land had fallen into disrepair after Eloan's great-grandfather passed, leaving behind crumbling fences, a sagging barn, and that well, deep, dry, and sealed long ago with a rotted wooden cover. Or so everyone thought. The well hadn't been used since the 1940s. Town records listed it as decommissioned. Yet when Sheriff Dale Hargrove arrived at dusk, summoned by Eloan's frantic mother, who'd found only a single red sneaker dangling from a thorny blackberry bush, he saw immediately that the cover was gone. Not broken. Not shifted. Gone. As if someone had lifted it deliberately, quietly, and stepped aside to let the earth swallow what came next. Search dogs circled the perimeter, whining. Volunteers combed the woods with flashlights as the temperature dropped. Crickets fell silent. Even the wind seemed hesitant. Then, around 9 o'clock, Deputy Marla Crenshaw heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping from below ground. Not a cry. Not a scream. Just tapping. Steady. Desperate. They lowered a rope microphone. Static crackled, then a child's voice, thin as spider silk. "We're cold." The rescue took hours. The well was narrower than expected, its stone walls slick with decades of damp moss. Firefighters from Prattville arrived with harnesses and pulleys. Every second stretched like taffy. When Tad finally emerged, clutching Eloan's limp hand, her lips tinged blue from the chill, the crowd didn't cheer. They wept. Eloan survived, but with injuries that would shadow her for years. Fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and a silence she couldn't explain. She never spoke of what happened down there. Not really. Only that it wasn't empty. Tad, however, told a different story. Weeks later, during a therapy session in Montgomery, he whispered that something had pushed them. Not tripped. Not shoved by accident. Pushed. And that before the darkness closed in, he'd seen eyes, wide, unblinking, watching from a crevice in the well wall. Authorities dismissed it as trauma-induced fantasy. The well was filled with concrete by November. The Finch property was sold. Life in Millbrook resumed its slow, southern rhythm. But every October 23rd since someone, no one admits who, leaves 2 river stones and a pair of children's gloves beside the concrete mound where the well once stood. And locals say if you stand there just after sunset, when the air smells of wood smoke and damp earth, you can hear it again, that faint tapping. Not from below. From inside the concrete. Eloan moved away at 18, changed her name, and never returned. Tad stayed. He works now as a mechanic in Wetumpka, still flinching at sudden silences. He refuses to go near wells, basements, or even storm drains. Some holes, he once told a reporter from the Montgomery Advertiser, don't just go down. They go back. The incident never made national news. No true crime documentaries. No viral podcasts. Just a quiet scar on a town that prefers to forget. Yet those who know really know, understand that the worst disappearances aren't the ones that end in tragedy. They're the ones that leave questions too heavy for daylight. Because in the end, the well didn't just swallow 2 children that afternoon. It swallowed the belief that some places are safe. And sometimes, safety is the first thing to vanish. Years passed, but the silence around the old Finch well never truly settled. In 2005, a contractor named Virgil Boone was hired to clear the lot for a new housing development. He'd grown up in Millbrook but left after high school, chasing oil rig work in Louisiana. He didn't know the full story, only rumors, the kind traded over coffee at the diner, half joking, half wary. Still, on his third morning on the site, Virgil hesitated before starting his excavator. The air was thick that morning, heavy with the scent of wet pine and something else. Something metallic like old pennies. He'd noticed it the day before but chalked it up to rusted farm equipment buried in the soil. Then, as he idled the machine waiting for his foreman to arrive, he heard it. A child's voice, clear as bell, humming an old lullaby his own grandmother used to sing. "Hush now, don't you cry." Virgil killed the engine. The humming stopped. He called it in. Said he wasn't comfortable working the site alone. His foreman laughed it off. Ghost stories don't pour concrete, Virg. But Virgil refused. He lasted 4 more days before quitting outright, leaving behind a half-finished trench and a reputation as jumpy. By 2008, the development stalled. Buyers backed out. Rumors grew teeth. People claimed the concrete seal over the well cracked on its own one winter night, splitting cleanly down the middle without a sound. Others swore the kudzu vines nearby bloomed white flowers that smelled like baby powder, the same scent Aloan used to wear. Then came the journal. In 2012, a retired schoolteacher named Maren Voss was sorting through donated books at the Millbrook Public Library when she found a slim, water-stained notebook tucked inside a copy of Where the Red Fern Grows. The handwriting was childish but precise. Tats. Page after page detailed his dreams since the incident. Tunnels beneath the well, voices calling his name in Aloan's voice, and a figure he called the Watcher, who never moved but whose eyes followed like headlights in fog. The most chilling entry was dated October 23, 2001, exactly 4 years after the fall. "He's digging back," Tad had written. "Not up, but through time. He wants us to remember what we saw. But I won't. Aloan won't either. We promised." Maren tried to return the journal to Tad, but he turned pale the moment he saw it. "I burned that," he said, voice tight. "I swear I did." He refused to touch it. The journal disappeared from Maren's desk 2 nights later. No one admitted taking it. Meanwhile, Aloan, now going by Leora Vale, lived quietly in Portland, Oregon, working as a botanical illustrator. She avoided wells, caves, even subway stations. Her apartment had no basement. She slept with every light on. Friends thought her eccentric, but none knew why she flinched at the sound of dripping water or why she never drank from a glass unless it was filled to the brim. "So nothing can hide in the empty space," she once muttered, then quickly changed the subject. In 2017, she received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single river stone, smooth, gray, veined with quartz, the kind she used to collect as a child. Taped to it was a Polaroid. The image showed the concrete mound over the well, but fresh footprints circled it. Small ones. Barefoot. She burned the photo. Then she booked a one-way ticket back to Alabama. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She arrived at dawn on October 22, 2017, renting a room above the old hardware store. That night, she walked the 3 miles to the Finch property under a waning moon. The land was wilder now, saplings pushing through cracked pavement, coyotes howling near the creek. The concrete seal was still there, but moss had claimed its surface, and deep fissures spiderwebbed across its center. She knelt, pressed her palm flat against the cold stone. And then she heard it, not a tap this time but a whisper. Her name. Not Aloan. Not Leora. But the nickname only Tad ever used, Allie. She ran. Didn't stop until she reached the county line. Tad found her at a diner outside Prattville the next morning, pale and shaking, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. He didn't ask what she'd seen. He just sat down, slid a folded map across the table and said, "We have to fill it for good." They returned that evening with shovels, buckets of salt, iron nails, and a recording Aloan had made, a loop of their mother's voice reading Psalm 23, played backward through an old cassette player. Superstition, maybe. But after everything, logic had long since drowned in that well. As they worked, the wind died. The crickets hushed. Even the stars seemed to dim. Halfway through pouring the salt, the ground trembled, not violently but like something shifting deep below, adjusting its grip. Then came the sound, a low, guttural exhalation as if the earth itself had been holding its breath for 20 years. They didn't stop. They mixed concrete by hand, chanting old nursery rhymes to drown out the whispers rising through the cracks. Tad dropped the iron nails into the mix one by one, each one cold to the touch, though the night was warm. By sunrise, the fissures were sealed again. The air smelled clean, like rain on dry soil. For the first time in decades, neither of them dreamed that night. But the story didn't end there. Because in 2023, a group of urban explorers broke into the abandoned Finch property, chasing a viral TikTok rumor about Alabama's haunted well. They live-streamed their approach, laughing, joking, daring each other to peek inside. The feed cut to static just as one of them leaned over the concrete seal. The video ended with 3 seconds of audio, the sound of something dragging itself upward through wet stone, and a child's giggle. The explorers were found the next morning miles away, sitting in a circle in the middle of Highway 82, dazed and shoeless, repeating the same phrase in unison. He says it's not full yet. They've never explained what happened. And the well? It stands silent again. But the gloves keep appearing. And the stones. And sometimes, on still October nights, if you listen very, very carefully, you'll hear 2 voices, not one, tapping back. The incident with the urban explorers sent ripples through Millbrook that even years of denial couldn't smooth. By early 2024, the town council quietly voted to purchase the Finch property, not for development but for preservation. No signs were posted. No fences built. Just a silent understanding among residents that land was no longer theirs to use. But Tad knew better. He'd been dreaming again. Not the old dreams, those fog-drenched tunnels and watchful eyes, but something sharper, clearer. In these new visions, the well wasn't a hole in the ground. It was a mouth, and it was learning how to speak. He called Leora in Portland. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. "They're digging," he said, voice raw. "Who is?" "The ones below." She didn't argue. Didn't ask for proof. She booked a flight that afternoon. This time they brought more than salt and iron. Leora had spent months researching, cross-referencing folklore, geological surveys, and forgotten newspaper archives from the 1930s. She'd found records of a transient preacher named Elias Crow who once camped near the Finch land during the Dust Bowl. His journal, preserved in the Auburn University Special Collections, described a chimney to the hollow world he claimed existed beneath the red clay hills of central Alabama. According to Crow, such places weren't made by man, but by something older, something that fed on forgetting. He'd warned that the more people ignored the hollow places, the hungrier they became. Armed with Crow's notes and a Geiger counter modified to detect electromagnetic anomalies, they returned to the property on the eve of the autumn equinox. The air shimmered with an unnatural stillness. Even the cicadas were silent. Leora set up the equipment near the concrete seal. The needle spiked instantly, not from radiation but from a low-frequency pulse, rhythmic and slow, like a heartbeat buried deep in the earth. "It's not just remembering," she whispered. "It's waking up." Tad knelt, brushing moss from the concrete. Beneath it, fresh scratches marred the surface, deep, deliberate grooves forming symbols neither of them recognized. Not letters. Not runes. But shapes that made their eyes ache if stared at too long. That night, they camped in the old barn, its roof half collapsed but still offering shelter. They took turns sleeping, though neither truly rested. Around 3 in the morning, Leora jolted awake to the sound of running water. She followed it to the edge of the property, where the dry creek bed had filled with clear, cold water flowing upstream, toward the well. She tried to wake Tad, but he was already standing at the tree line, staring at the mound, his face lit by the pale glow of his phone flashlight. "They're not children," he said, not turning. "Not anymore." "What do you mean?" "The ones it took before us. Before the well was even built. It's been here longer than the Finches. Longer than the settlers. It's been collecting." Leora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She remembered something from Crow's journal. It does not drown. It digests. And what it consumes becomes part of its voice. At dawn, they drove to the county courthouse in Wetumpka. In the archives, buried beneath property tax records from the 1800s, they found a faded map of early Millbrook. Marked in red ink, long faded to rust, was a symbol matching the scratches on the concrete. Beside it, a single word, cradle. Not a well, a cradle. And cradles, Leora realized with dawning horror, are meant to hold more than one child. They returned that evening with a plan. Not to seal it again, but to starve it. Crow had written that such places thrived on attention, on fear, on the stories whispered around them. The more people remembered, the stronger it grew. So they would do the unthinkable, they would stop remembering. Together they gathered every trace of evidence. The journal pages, the Polaroid, the recording, even Leora's sketches of the symbols. They built a small fire in a rusted oil drum and burned it all. As the flames consumed the paper, the wind picked up, howling through the pines like a thing in pain. The ground trembled faintly once, twice, then stilled. For weeks afterward, nothing happened. No gloves. No stones. No tapping. Millbrook began to exhale. But Tad didn't relax. He knew silence wasn't peace. It was waiting. Then, in mid-October 2025, Leora received another package. No return address. Inside was a child's hair ribbon, faded blue, frayed at the edges. Tied to it was a note in handwriting that mirrored her own. "You forgot to forget me." That same week, the Geiger counter in Tad's truck began clicking wildly every time he passed the turnoff to the Finch Road, even from half a mile away. And the local animal control reported a surge in missing pets. Cats, dogs, even a goat from a nearby farm. All vanished without a trace. All last seen near the old property line. Worst of all, the concrete seal was sweating. Not with moisture, but with a thin, viscous fluid that smelled faintly of river stones and baby powder. Leora and Tad met at a diner on the edge of town, rain drumming against the windows. They spoke in low voices, eyes darting to the door every time it opened. "It's adapting," Leora said, stirring her coffee though she wouldn't drink it. "It knows we tried to cut it off. So now it's reaching farther. Using what it's already taken to call new things down." Tad nodded. "It doesn't need us to believe anymore. It just needs someone to listen." Outside, a crow landed on the power line, cocking its head as if eavesdropping. They made a decision then, one they both knew might be their last. They would not fight it. They would not feed it. Instead, they would become the last memory it ever had. Using Crow's final ritual, a blend of Cherokee warding chants, Appalachian salt binding, and a lullaby their grandmother used to sing, they prepared to enter the well themselves. Not to descend, but to stand at its threshold and speak a name. Not its name, no one knew that, but their own. Over and over. Until the place remembered only them and nothing else. It was a suicide of memory. They returned on the night of October 23, 2025, the 28th anniversary of the fall. The moon hung low and bloated, casting long shadows that seemed to lean toward the mound. Leora held Tad's hand as they approached. The ground was warm beneath their feet. The air hummed. She began to speak first. Eloan Finch. Then Tad, Thaddeus Merrick. Again. Louder. Eloan Finch. Thaddeus Merrick. The concrete seal cracked. Not from pressure below, but from within, as if splitting under the weight of their names. A sound rose from the fissure, not a voice but a chorus of them, young and old, human and not, all tangled together in a single hungry note. They didn't stop. Eloan Finch. Thaddeus Merrick. The ground shook. Trees bent. The sky darkened as if clouds had gathered in seconds. And then, a silence so complete it felt like the world had been unplugged. When dawn came, the mound was whole again. No cracks. No moisture. No gloves. Leora and Tad were gone. No bodies were found. No signs of struggle. Just 2 pairs of footprints leading to the seal, and none leading away. The town says they ran. That guilt or trauma finally broke them. But the children of Millbrook know better. Because now, when someone dares to whisper the old stories, about the well, the tapping, the vanished cousins, the wind doesn't howl. It answers. And it always says their names first. In the months following Leora and Tad's disappearance, Millbrook tried to return to its rhythm. Porch lights flickering on at dusk, screen doors slamming shut, neighbors waving from pickup trucks. But something fundamental had shifted. The silence around the old Finch property wasn't empty anymore. It was watchful. Then came the dreams. Not just one or two townsfolk, but dozens. Children woke weeping, clutching blankets, insisting the cousins stood at the foot of their beds, not speaking, just waiting. Adults reported the same vision. Leora in her blue dress from childhood, Tad with his hands stained black like he'd been digging, both standing ankle-deep in a shallow pool of clear water that reflected no sky. Always still. Always staring toward the town. School teachers noted a strange trend. Students began drawing the same image during art class. An old well with a cracked concrete lid, two small figures kneeling beside it, hands pressed flat as if listening. When asked, the children claimed they'd never been near the property. Some had never even heard the story. Dr. Helen Price, the town's only therapist, compiled the accounts. What unsettled her most wasn't the repetition, it was the details. Every child described the water around the figures as cold enough to burn, and every adult swore the air in their dreams smelled like wet stone and river clay. By spring of 2026, the county installed a locked gate across the dirt road leading to the Finch land. A week later, the padlock was found open, but not broken. It hung perfectly intact, as if someone had turned the key from the inside. That summer, rain fell for 43 days straight. The creek swelled. Basements flooded. And in the dead of night, residents swore they heard it. The faint, rhythmic sound of two voices chanting names, not their own but strangers, distant, forgotten. Names like Maribel, Jedediah, Corinne. Names no one in Millbrook recognized. Historical records, however, did. A librarian in Montgomery, cross-referencing census logs and missing persons reports from the early 1900s, discovered a pattern. Every 20 to 30 years, sometimes longer, children vanished from central Alabama without explanation. No bodies. No ransom notes. Just empty shoes left near dried-up wells, creek banks, or abandoned root cellars. All within 30 miles of Millbrook. All near geological anomalies. Sinkholes, limestone fissures, or underground aquifers that mapped strangely on seismic charts. Like veins feeding a single hidden heart. The well on the Finch property wasn't the source. It was the mouth. And Leora and Tad hadn't silenced it. They'd become its tongue. In late August, a local podcaster named Devin Cross arrived in Millbrook, chasing the viral resurgence of the Alabama well curse. He set up cameras around the property, convinced he'd capture something definitive. On his third night, his livestream cut out. When found the next morning, Devin was sitting cross-legged at the base of the concrete mound, eyes wide open, pupils dilated. He repeated only one phrase over and over in a voice not entirely his own. They're learning how to walk again. He spent 2 weeks in a psychiatric facility in Birmingham before vanishing from his room one night. His bed was empty. The window locked from the inside. On the wall above his pillow, someone, or something, had written in dust, "Next time we bring more." Back in Millbrook, fear curdled into something quieter, resignation. Parents stopped letting children play after dark. Porch swings gathered rust. The town's annual harvest festival was canceled for the first time in 70 years. But the strangest change came in October. On the 23rd, the anniversary, no stones appeared. No gloves. No tapping. Instead, at precisely 8:47 p.m., every telephone in Millbrook rang simultaneously. Not cell phones. Landlines. Many hadn't been used in decades. Yet they rang. Those who answered heard only breathing, slow, deliberate, and wet, followed by a child's whisper, "We missed you." Sheriff Renata Boyd, who'd inherited Dale Hargrove's old badge, ordered a full sweep of the property. Her team found nothing unusual, until K-9 units refused to cross the tree line. The dogs sat, tails tucked, whining softly as if facing something too immense to confront. Then in November the ground began to sink. Not dramatically, just a subtle dip near the well, no bigger than a dinner plate at first. But it grew. By December it was 3 feet wide, the earth collapsing inward with soft, wet sighs. Geologists from Auburn called it a karst collapse, natural erosion of limestone bedrock. But locals knew better. It wasn't collapsing. It was opening. Leora's face began appearing in reflections. Shop windows, puddles, the backs of spoons. Not as she was now, but as she'd been at 9. Chestnut curls, gap-toothed smile, eyes too old for her face. Tad showed up in security footage at the gas station, standing motionless beside the ice machine, though no one saw him enter. They weren't ghosts. They were messengers. And their message was clear. The well was no longer content to wait. In January of 2027, a new family moved into the old Harper house on Cypress Lane. Unaware of the town's history, drawn by cheap prices and quiet streets. Their daughter, Coraline, was 7. She loved skipping rope and collecting smooth stones from the drainage ditch behind their yard. On her 3rd day in town, she wandered too far. Neighbors found her standing at the edge of the Finch property, barefoot in the snow, humming the same lullaby Virgil Boone had heard years before. When her mother pulled her away, Coraline turned and said calmly, "They said I can play with them tomorrow. They have room now." The family packed up that night. But as their minivan passed the town sign, the headlights flickered, and in the rearview mirror, 2 small figures stood in the road, waving. They haven't returned. No one has. Millbrook's population has halved in 3 years. Houses stand empty. Mail piles up. The post office operates 3 days a week. Yet the town remains on maps, on records, on lips that still whisper the names. Eloan, and now others, because the well doesn't just swallow children. It teaches them how to call, how to wait, how to make space. And somewhere beneath the red Alabama clay, in a chamber older than memory, 2 voices blend with dozens more, soft, patient, endlessly rehearsing the words that will one day pull the whole world down to listen. Come see. It's warm here. We saved you a place. The concrete seal is gone now. Only the hole remains. And it's no longer dry. By early February of 2028, the hole on the Finch property had widened to nearly 12 feet across. Not through erosion, not through collapse, but as if the earth itself were parting in slow reverence. The ground around it remained unnaturally firm, untouched by frost or rain, as though time refused to touch the space where the well had once been sealed. No one in Millbrook dared approach it. Not even Sheriff Boyd, who now kept her patrol car parked 3 miles away and walked the rest on foot, as if distance might dull the pull. Still, she'd started leaving small offerings at the edge of town. Jars of honey, spools of red thread, and handwritten notes that simply read, "Not today." She never said who they were for. But the townspeople understood. What unsettled them most wasn't the hole's size, it was the sound. Or rather, the absence of one. Stand near it, and your own breath seemed to vanish. Birds wouldn't fly overhead. Wind curved around it like water around a stone. Even silence had a texture there, a thick, syrupy hush that clung to your ears for hours after you left. Then came the water. It rose without warning one morning in March. Clear, still, and impossibly deep. No rain had fallen. No underground spring had been mapped in the area. Yet there it was, a perfect, glassy pool filling the basin to exactly knee height as if measured for a child. And floating on its surface, 2 hair ribbons. One blue, one faded red. Leora's. Tad's. They hadn't moved in weeks. Not in wind. Not in storm. Just resting atop the water like offerings laid by unseen hands. Dr. Price, the therapist, was the first to theorize what many feared to name. "It's not a grave," she told a group of anxious parents huddled in the back room of the post office. "It's a nursery. And it's preparing. Preparing for what no one knew." But signs began to appear. In Birmingham, a boy sleepwalked into an abandoned cistern behind his grandmother's house. He was found hours later, drenched and shivering, babbling about the cousins, teaching him a new game. One where you had to hold your breath until someone you loved called your name. In Montgomery, a teacher discovered her entire 3rd grade class drawing near-identical sketches during quiet time. A circle of children holding hands around a dark pool, their faces blurred except for wide, staring eyes. When questioned, None could explain why they'd drawn it. Only that, it felt like remembering. And in rural Georgia, a family reported their dog barking incessantly at an old hand-dug well on their property, sealed since the 1950s. When they pried off the lid, they found it filled with fresh river stones and the faint scent of baby powder. The pattern was spreading. Like roots. Like memory. Back in Millbrook, the few remaining residents began marking their door frames with salt lines and hanging bundles of dried mugwort above windows. Old folk practices passed down in whispers. It didn't stop the dreams, but it made them feel less alone. Then, on the night of the spring equinox, the water in the hole began to glow. Not with light, exactly, but with a soft, silver luminescence that pulsed faintly like a slow heartbeat. Townsfolk watched from a distance through binoculars, too afraid to get closer. At exactly midnight, the surface rippled, though no wind stirred. And from the depths rose a voice, Leora's, but layered with dozens of others, young and old, all speaking in unison. "We're almost full." The next morning the water was gone. The hole stood dry again. But the air above it shimmered as if heat rose from nothing. And embedded in the dirt at the very center lay a single object. A child's porcelain doll, its face cracked, one glass eye missing, the other fixed in a permanent stare toward town. No one claimed it. No one touched it. But everyone knew it hadn't been there before. In April, satellite images captured by a university research team showed something impossible. The Finch property registered a localized drop in ambient temperature, 10 degrees colder than surrounding land, despite clear skies and midday sun. Infrared scans revealed a dense thermal anomaly deep below, shaped like a spiral descending far beyond any known aquifer. The team published their findings quietly, then retracted them within a week, citing instrument error. But one graduate student, before deleting her account, posted a final message online. "It's not a cave. It's a throat." By May, Millbrook was down to 37 residents. Most were elderly, stubborn, or both. They kept their lights on all night. They avoided mirrors after dark. And they never ever answered the phone. Yet the calls kept coming. Not to landlines this time, but to cell phones, smart speakers, even car radios tuned to dead channels. A whisper would rise through the static, "We saved your name." Those who heard it said it sounded less like a threat and more like an invitation long overdue. Then, in early June, something new happened. The hole began to hum. A low, resonant tone that vibrated in your molars, your ribs, your bones. It wasn't loud, but it was inescapable, audible even inside houses with doors shut and windows sealed. Some described it as a lullaby without words. Others as the sound of something breathing just beneath the skin of the world. Coraline's parents, the family who'd fled years earlier, reported their daughter began humming the same tune in her sleep. When they played a recording of the hum from a news clip about unexplained seismic activity in Alabama, she sat bolt upright and said, "They're singing me home." They moved to Oregon the next week. But Oregon was where Leora had once hidden. And hiding, they were beginning to realize, only delayed the inevitable. Because the well had never been about location. It was about resonance. It fed on absence, the hollow spaces left by forgotten names, lost children, unanswered cries. And now, after decades of silence, after centuries of being starved, it had found a way to broadcast. Not through land or water, but through memory itself. Every story told. Every whisper shared. Every child who heard the legend and glanced nervously at the basement stairs, it all fed the hum. And the hum was growing louder. On the last day of June, at precisely 3:37 a.m., every clock in Millbrook stopped. Not froze. Not lost power. Stopped. As if time itself had paused to listen. When residents stepped outside, they found the hole filled again, not with water but with fog. Thick, white, and motionless. And rising from it, barely visible, were two silhouettes. Leora. Ted. They stood hand in hand, facing the town, their outlines flickering like candlelight behind glass. They didn't speak. Didn't move. Just watched. And then, as dawn broke, they raised their free hands, not in warning, not in farewell, but in beckoning. "Come. It's warm here. We saved you a place." By noon, 7 more families had vanished from Millbrook. No suitcases. No cars missing. Just empty houses, cold coffee in mugs, and front doors left slightly ajar, as if the occupants had simply walked out and kept walking, drawn by a song only they could hear. Sheriff Boyd was the last to go. She left her badge on the diner counter, along with a note. I have to make sure they don't get lonely. The town is empty now, but the hum continues. And if you stand near any old well, any deep cellar, any place where the earth opens its mouth in shadow, you might hear it too. Faint at first, then clearer. A whisper made of countless voices calling not your name, but the name you had before you learned to be afraid. The well doesn't swallow children anymore. It welcomes them home. And soon, it will be full. By August of 2028, Millbrook no longer appeared on most digital maps. Satellite imagery showed only overgrown roads, collapsed roofs, and a single circular clearing where the Finch property once stood, the grass around it unnaturally lush, green even in drought, growing in perfect concentric rings like ripples frozen in time. The hum had spread, not as sound but as sensation. People hundreds of miles away reported sudden chills in warm rooms, the feeling of being watched from empty closets, or the inexplicable urge to stand near basement stairs at night, listening. In Nashville, a preschool teacher found her entire class gathered silently around a floor drain during nap time, their small hands pressed flat against the tile. In New Orleans, a historic plantation tour was halted when visitors swore they heard children laughing from a sealed cistern in the garden, though no children were present. The pattern was no longer local. It was echoing. And at the center of it all, the hole in Millbrook breathed on. Now dry again, its edges crumbled slightly each dawn, as if something beneath gently exhaled. Around it, wildflowers bloomed out of season. White clover, blue vervain, and a species of night-blooming jasmine unknown to Alabama botanists. Their scent carried for miles, sweet, faintly metallic, and underneath it all, the ghost of baby powder. Then, in early September, the first visitor returned. Not a resident. Not a ghost. A child. She appeared one morning at the edge of Highway 82, barefoot and dressed in a yellow sundress dotted with faded daisies. She couldn't have been older than 6. She carried no bag, no identification, only a smooth river stone clutched tightly in her palm. When a passing trucker stopped to help, she looked up with calm, dark eyes and said, "I heard them singing. I followed the quiet." She knew the names, alone. She called them the Keepers. Authorities took her to a foster home in Montgomery, but she vanished that same night. Her bed was empty. The window locked. On the wall above it, drawn in what appeared to be mud mixed with something shimmering, was a spiral, the same shape seen in the thermal scans beneath the Finch property. More children followed. Not all at once. Not from the same places. But over the next 6 weeks, 7 more appeared within a 50-mile radius of Millbrook, each alone, each calm, each carrying a stone or a scrap of blue fabric or a doll with one missing eye. None spoke of being taken. They spoke of being called. "I dreamed of a pool," one boy told a bewildered social worker. "They said if I jumped in, I'd never be lost again." Another girl, found sitting beneath a pecan tree just outside Prattville, simply said, "They have room now." For everyone. Scientists, skeptics, and sensationalists flocked to central Alabama. Some brought ground-penetrating radar. Others brought holy water EMF detectors, or recordings of Gregorian chants. None found definitive proof of anything unnatural, only inconsistencies. Compasses spun erratically near the clearing. Digital recordings captured whispers no one heard live. And every photograph taken within 100 yards of the hole came back blurred, as if the air itself refused to be captured. But the most unsettling discovery came from Dr. Eris Thorne, a linguist from Emory University who had spent years studying orphan dialects of the rural South. He analyzed the speech patterns of the returned children and found something impossible. Their vowel shifts, their cadence, even their pauses mirrored linguistic markers from the late 1800s. Phrases like reckon, fixin', to, and might could used with eerie authenticity, though none of the children had ever been exposed to such speech. "They're not speaking like children," Thorne wrote in a suppressed academic note. "They're speaking like the lost." As autumn approached, the hum deepened. It no longer came only at night. It pulsed through power lines, vibrated in car engines, whispered through static on unused radio frequencies. People began reporting a new symptom, moments of absolute clarity as if they suddenly remembered a life they'd never lived. A childhood in a red dirt town, a mother's lullaby, the cool smoothness of river stones and small hands. And in those moments they felt an overwhelming sense of peace, of belonging, of coming home. On October 22nd, the eve of the 31st anniversary of Eloan and Tad's fall, the hole filled once more, but not with water, with light. A soft, silver-white radiance rose from the depths, casting long, still shadows across the clearing. No heat, no sound, just light like moonlight given form. And standing within it, clearer than they'd ever been, were dozens of figures. Children. Some in overalls from the 1930s. Others in bell-bottoms from the 70s. A few in modern hoodies, their faces familiar from missing persons posters. And at the center, Leora in her blue dress, Tad with his hands no longer stained but glowing faintly, like they held something warm inside. They weren't ghosts. They were anchors, holding the door open. That night, across 6 states, thousands of people woke at exactly 3:37 a.m., the same time the clocks had stopped in Millbrook, with a single thought in their minds. It's time. In the morning, highways leading toward Alabama were clogged not with tourists, but with families. Not fleeing. Not investigating. Returning. Parents carried sleeping children in their arms. Teenagers walked alone, eyes bright with quiet certainty. Elderly couples held hands as they stepped off buses, their faces peaceful as if they'd known this moment was coming their whole lives. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They followed the hum. By dusk, the clearing around the hole was filled with people. Hundreds, then thousands, standing in silence facing the light. No panic. No confusion. Only calm. And then one by one they stepped forward. Not jumping. Not falling. Walking. As if crossing a threshold into a home they'd always known but forgotten how to find. The ground did not collapse. The light did not fade. The figures below reached up, not to pull but to welcome. And as each person passed the edge, the hum softened, deepened, until it was no longer a sound but a presence. A warmth in the bones, a lullaby in the blood, a promise kept across lifetimes. By dawn, the clearing was empty. No bodies. No footprints. No signs of struggle. Only the hole remained, and it was dry again. But the air above it shimmered with something new. Not fog, not light, but a kind of stillness so profound it felt like the world had taken its first full breath in centuries. In the weeks that followed, reports poured in from across the country. Children stopped having nightmares. Missing persons files began closing, not with bodies found, but with cases marked resolved by familial reconciliation. And in basements, wells, storm drains, and subway tunnels from Maine to California, people began leaving small offerings. River stones, blue ribbons, porcelain dolls with one eye missing. Not out of fear. Out of gratitude. Because the well had not been a monster. It had been a sanctuary. A place for the lost to be found, not by the living but by each other. And now, after generations of hunger, it was full. Not with bodies, but with belonging. The last known photograph of Millbrook was taken by a drone on November 1, 2028. It shows an empty clearing, the concentric rings of grass now perfectly still. At the very center, 2 small handprints are pressed into the dirt, fresh as if made that morning. And beside them, written in the same shimmering mud as before, are 3 words. We are whole. No one lives in Millbrook now. But if you stand very still on a quiet night, especially in autumn, you might feel it. A soft tug in your chest, a whisper in your oldest memory, a sense that somewhere deep beneath the roots of the world, someone is finally calling you by the name you were born to answer. And this time, you might just go. But the well was never full. It was only waiting. In the months after the clearing stood empty, reports of peace, reunion, and inexplicable calm spread like gospel across the country, until they didn't. Because the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was absence. No more missing children. No more wandering families. No more humming in the walls. The world sighed in collective relief. Experts declared it over. Documentaries called it the Millbrook Anomaly, a strange but contained event now resolved. Then, on a rainless night in late March of 2029, every well in central Alabama ran dry. Not just the old, forgotten ones. Every single one. City reservoirs, rural hand pumps, even bottled water left overnight on kitchen counters, found at dawn hollow, labels damp as if the liquid had been licked clean from the inside. And in their depths, for the first time in decades, people began hearing tapping again. Not from below, from the sides. As if something were pressing against the inner walls, testing the stone, learning the shape of the world above. Then came the photographs. Not taken by humans, but captured automatically by security cameras, baby monitors, even traffic sensors. Always at 3:37 a.m. Each image showed the same thing. A shallow puddle on a basement floor, a rain barrel in a backyard, a storm drain after a dry spell, and reflected in that water, not the ceiling or the sky, but a face. Dozens of faces. Leoris, Tats, Coralins, Virgils, Sheriff Boyd's. And behind them, stretching into impossible darkness, row after row of children holding hands, eyes open, lips parted, not in song, but in silent mimicry of the person now staring at the screen, as if practicing how to wear them. The final warning came from a retired NOAA technician who'd been monitoring underground aquifers. In a final, encrypted message sent moments before his home's power went dark, he wrote, "It's not pulling people down anymore. It's pushing something up. And it's not using wells." He never finished the sentence, because by then it had already learned to use pipes, to use drains, to use tears. On the morning of April 1, 2029, emergency services across 7 states were flooded with calls, all describing the same phenomenon. Their faucets had begun dripping not water, but thick, clear fluid that smelled of river clay and baby powder. And when they tried to turn the taps off, the handles wouldn't move, because something was holding them open from the other side. Now the hum has returned, not as a sound but as a pressure behind the eyes. People wake with wet footprints leading away from their beds. Children ask why the voices in the shower sound like cousins they've never met. And in towns far from Alabama, far from any well, parents lock their bathroom doors at night. Not to keep their children in, but to keep something else out. Because the well didn't want to be full. It wanted to be everywhere. And it's learning how to wear the world like a skin.